Hello everybody, thank you so much for stopping by. My name is ChitChad and welcome back to another episode of Planet Coaster, where we are building a video game theme park, specifically a Mario theme park, and today we are going to continue working on the Luigi's Mansion Dark Ride. And I just gotta say, this is actually, spoiler alert, gonna pull back the curtain. The magic is about to be ruined. This is actually the second time I am doing this voiceover, because the first time I did it, it was around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I have discovered that there is a time limit to where my brain hasn't turned into mush. It's like Cinderella. You know how her carriage turns into a pumpkin? Well, Chad's brain turns into a pumpkin around 1 o'clock. There is the operation of Chad's brain between 9 and 12:30, but once 1 o'clock hits, or around 1 o'clock, Chad's brain turns into a pumpkin and he is no longer able to communicate like a normal human being. And I listened back on the video, I'm like, I was off the walls. I was jumping topics left and right without any sort of segue whatsoever. So I'm like, I need to re-record this VO. So you're gonna get the more calm, collected Chad. The Chad that had his coffee this morning and actually can communicate and function like a normal human being. So today we're gonna be working on more of the interior of the ride itself. We're gonna be working on several scenes for the ride. Not completing any of them specifically, but just kind of laying the foundation, or continuing to lay the foundation from the previous episode. I've jumped around a lot more in this build process than I did with the Pokemon themed Dark Ride, just because in that ride I wanted very specific elements. I wanted a forest area, a city area, I wanted a cave area, a beach area, and all of those were so vastly different from one another. But with this one, we don't have terribly a lot of opportunities to really shift the overall visual tone or aesthetic with the ride itself. In fact, at the beginning, we have most of the variance between going into EGAD's lab, which is a very, technological, even though it's a rundown shack, there's a lot of technology, so we can play up on that. Then we moved into the greenhouse, where we have a lot of plants and obviously the piranhas, so that changes up the visual tone. But once we get into Luigi's Mansion, it's going to be more and more tricky to really differentiate each of the rooms. Obviously, we have kind of this entryway, which in the original game I remember had 2 staircases going to either side, so I wanted to do that. And then we're going to probably go into like a kitchen area, and then into kind of a grand ballroom, and then up the stairs from there. We're going to have the long hallway, which will eventually lead us into where the ride interacts with the queue. Speaking of the queue, later in this video, we will also be adding more to the queue area, especially the portion where it goes into the quote-unquote outside of the mansion, even though it's technically still inside the show building. So we're going to theme that up just a little bit to make it look like it's kind of outside. Almost think of the beginning of Pirates of the Caribbean, or the connection between the Blue Bayou restaurant and Pirates of the Caribbean. You're still inside of the show building, but it's meant to look like you are outside. And speaking of outside, that's another thing. I've brought it up in the past in some of my other videos, and that's just something that's always kind of, I wouldn't say it's bothered me, but it's a bit of a design limitation that the roofs of buildings don't really change the way that lighting affects the building. So obviously, as the daylight is turned on, there is still light bleeding into the building. And the only way to get like a true sense of being indoors without having any other additional natural lighting affect it is to switch it to nighttime. I wish there was some way to kind of encapsulate a building, or to have some sort of, once the building's been created, to have some sort of check that you could go onto in the menu and like check, like a check dialog box kind of thing, where it's just like anything contained inside of this structure have the daylight or have whatever natural lighting source not affect it, sort of thing. That's probably like very difficult to do, I imagine. I'm not 100% sure on that, so I'm not gonna say, oh, that's easy. That's not. I have no idea, to be honest. I have no idea, but it would be a nice thing to have, just so the lighting can stay consistently what you want it for the ride experience. The way to get around that is to actually build terrain above and kind of encapsulate the entire ride into a mountain, and that's what I did for the Pokemon Dark Ride. But even then, still, if it's not perfect, you'll still get some natural lighting kind of seeping into the building, and it looks kind of weird aesthetically. I suppose that you could build like a mountain around the entire thing, right? A cave, whatever you want to call it, some kind of foundation that utilizes the terrain of the world, and then build a building on top of that. So it's a turduncan of buildings. You have your interior show building, your exterior mountainous terrain and then an additional exterior building, and that's a lot of work, and I don't want to have to do that. So the easiest thing is just to turn it into nighttime mode and ride the ride, which if I've seen a lot of comments on if I'm ever going to upload anything to the Planet Coaster workshop. The answer is yes. I just need to actually complete a project first before I'll upload anything on there, because oftentimes, either due to interest or just computer limitations, I've had to split off projects or just not finish projects. So I want to be able to do that before I upload anything to the workshop, because if I upload something, I want it to be like, you know, everything that I've got, the entire park, everything's finished, everything looks as good as I can make it type thing. Just for presentation standards, you know, that sort of thing. I want my first outing to be a good one, you know, and just really hit the ground running, because there's so many amazing creators on the platform that are just creating like just mind-bogglingly cool things, and I want to at least have the first thing that I put on there to be a finished product and have it look really nice, or as nice as I can make it type thing. So as I said, we're now working on the exterior portion of the queue. I'm putting exterior in quotation marks with my voice, quotation marks, and just to make it look like it's actually outside, even though it isn't. And something that I mentioned in the previous VO that I did for this episode, it happens to me all the time when I'm building this, just because thematically it's very similar to the Haunted Mansion. So the entire time I'm building this, I swear I always get the Haunted Mansion theme song stuck in my head, and I'm just like, do. Like I start humming it, I'm like, no, not again. So I've been listening to a lot of podcasts or just YouTube channels where there's obviously a lot of talking, because music just isn't doing it. Like, it's not drowning out the Haunted Mansion theme song. So lately I've been listening to a lot of Drawfee, which if you've never checked out Drawfee, it's a really fun art channel where they take suggestions and then do like a whole episode themed around that. So the one I was watching, because I was still on a Halloween kick, I was watching the Goosebumps episode that they did. So basically one of them gave the other artists a prompt or one of the titles of the book, and then they had to do a cover interpretation just off the title alone. And sometimes they were pretty close, and other times they were way off, because Goosebumps had some wacky titles, but even wackier cover art, and some of them were just hauntingly weird. So it's a really fun watch. I definitely recommend it if you're like into art or just watching people try and struggle and come up with like concepts or try and figure out exactly what the heck this topic even means. One of them always ends up drawing some kind of nightmare fuel creation, and it's just wonderful to watch. They also did a Ruby episode recently, which if you're a fan of anime or just animation in general, Ruby's a really fun a series to watch. And they had one of the character designers on there, which is also really cool. I love listening to, I listen to a lot of behind the scenes stuff, whether it's about theme park. I watch a lot of behind the scenes on theme park stuff, but it's getting like harder and harder to find that kind of stuff. And a lot of like the official channels that like showcase it, they're not really going into a lot of the in-depth stuff. And I don't know if that's like they don't want to talk about their proprietary technology or anything like that, but it's not as like interesting as some of the older things used to be. Because like I found where they made the company that made the animatronics for the Jurassic Park ride, and they were talking about, you know, their different types of mixtures that they had to come up with for the skin, because all of the animatronics were being surrounded by water, which is a huge problem obviously for electronics. So they were talking about all the different mixtures that they had to use, not actually saying it because that's, again, it was a proprietary thing, but it was really cool to see like how they put that all together. And there are still some like places that showcase that kind of stuff. I just feel like it's kind of a rarity. So I listen to like a lot of podcast channels or YouTube channels, like Defunct Land is a really fun one, and just about different like theme park stuff. But I do that in general with movies. As soon as I'm done watching the movie, I will watch like all of the behind the scenes stuff. Recently I picked up the new Power Rangers movie from, I think I was at Zia or Bookman's or something like that, and it was like $12. I'm like, oh, you know, I don't normally buy movies anymore, so I just wait to either like rent them on Redbox or, you know, buy them when they're on sale or if they're like pre-owned. And I saw Power Rangers there for like $12. I'm like, yeah, I'll pick that up. And I watched like all the behind the scenes stuff and how they put together the suits. And that stuff is just amazing to me to watch, like, you know, well, Legacy did all the concepts, and then we sent it over to Weta, and then Weta designed the suits, and just watching the process of that sort of thing is just like, wow, mind-boggling. And all the different materials and how many times they've had to invent like new technology to make things work. Like, well, we want to have like a second layer of depth to these helmets and the suits, so we had to come up with like a how to texturize them, but also add like a clear coat over them, but have it have like this sort of thickness. And just like watching all that, I'm like, wow, that's so interesting. And I just think theme parks are really fun because, you know, it's accessible. Like, you could go there and you can see that stuff. You're not necessarily going to be able to go, you know, and see the props from a movie unless they're on display somewhere, which they're not always. So theme parks, you know, I can watch a thing about the Haunted Mansion per se and how they like did the ghost effect, and then I can go back on the mansion and actually, you know, witness it with my own eyes and be like, oh, and I understand it more. Or, you know, find out a little tidbit that someone actually, like, I don't remember if they, you know, you had like a slingshot or they shot one of the glass panes in the Haunted Mansion, but someone did something years and years and years ago to actually damage one of the glass panes of the Haunted Mansion, and the glass that they had to utilize actually stretches the entire length of the room. So it is a ginormous piece of glass in order for that ghost effect in the ballroom to actually work. It is one seamless piece of glass. So, and part of it's actually fractured. So there was no way for them to be able to replace that glass. They would literally probably have to rip off the roof of the showroom itself and drop in a new plane of glass, and there's just no way they're gonna do that. So they made it look like it was a spider web over the crack, which is like genius. Stuff like that I just find so fascinating. And I think I've talked about this before, but like Expedition Everest over at Disney's Animal Kingdom, I actually got to ride that ride. I was one of the first people to get to ride that ride because I was there in the first week of operation, and it was actually kind of cool because on the way there, we had a little bit of delay with one of our flights, so we actually went into like, I don't know what it's called, but it's kind of like a waiting suite type thing if you're like one of the pass holders, or if you're like, you know, you're a frequent flyer kind of thing. I don't remember exactly what it was because I was kind of young at the time. But we were waiting around in there, and I was talking about it and saying, I really hope that this ride's open so we actually get to ride it. And one of the guys overheard me, and he came over and he was like, are you talking about Expedition Everest? I'm like, yeah, I'm really excited for it. And he's like, I was actually one of the engineers on that ride. I'm like, no way. So I was like completely enamored, and I was just talking about theme parks and stuff with this guy. And he was just like, yeah, and I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be like their first week of operation, so you'll probably be able to ride it. And we did. And what was cool about that was I got to see the Yeti when he was in, I think they would refer to it as A mode. And A mode is he's fully moving. He's fully animatronic. You know, he's actually like reaching out towards the car or the audience and actually doing something. Whereas now he's in, I believe, what they call or refer to as B mode, where he doesn't move at all. And the reason for that is the foundation that he's sitting on is actually cracking. And if they were to continue moving him in A mode, it would have damaged it even further. So now he's in B mode, and all they do is like blow air at him and flash like a disco light in order to make it look like he's moving. So now he's referred to as Disco Yeti. So just like stuff like that I find really interesting and just fun to read about or fun to listen to. So I've been on a real podcast kick lately. But with all that being said, we're actually getting towards the end of today's episode, so we're going to finish this up with some final looks of the Luigi's Mansion ride. We're going to look at some of the queue area, we're going to look at some of the ride elements, and then we're going to take a short little jaunt on the ride itself. A lot of the triggers still need to be adjusted. A lot of the movement of the ride vehicle itself needs to still be adjusted. Again, we're just kind of blocking it out, getting it ready for as we finalize it further and further. But this is just kind of a rough draft, you know, and then we're just going to go back in and keep doing revision after revision until we get it just right. But this is going to be a rough look so far. I'm really liking this project. It's a lot of fun. I hope you all are as well. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. I could not do it without you. Thank you so much. If you want to help out the channel, consider checking out the Patreon or subscribing if you're not already. If you like this content and you want to see more like it, check out the video to the top right. And if you're into art, animation, or voice acting, check out the video to the bottom right. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will chat with you later.